The deed to a 2-bedroom villa in Cancún had my mother's name notarized across the bottom, 4 maintenance invoices sitting past due, and not one single dollar of the down payment that was ever actually hers. My name is Naomi. I'm 31. I'm a senior financial analyst, the person my company calls when 9 figures on a ledger won't reconcile to the penny. So when I found that deed folded inside a manila envelope my mother had once asked me to store for her, for safekeeping, she'd said, I didn't confront her that night. I opened a spreadsheet instead. Over 4 years, $48,000 in student loan refund checks had passed through her hands, on their way to becoming a pool she visited twice a year. She thought I'd forgotten those checks existed. She hadn't counted on the fact that I track everything I lose, the same way I track everything my clients lose, quietly, and with dates. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I always wonder how far a story like this travels. Welcome back to Karma's Keeper, where the ones who balanced everyone else's books finally open their own. If you've ever handed someone your trust because they said family takes care of family, and watched them spend it on themselves, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. But let me take you back 4 years, to the fall I signed my first student loan refund check over to the woman who raised me, because she asked me to, and because I still believed asking was the same as needing. I grew up in a small brick house outside Dayton, Ohio, where my mother kept the household finances in a spiral notebook she called the family budget, though budget was generous for what it actually was. My father, Walter, worked at a tire plant for 26 years and handed his paycheck to my mother, Carol, every other Friday without opening the envelope first. That was the arrangement. He earned. She managed. I watched. My brother Caleb is 3 years younger than me, and the house ran on an arithmetic I understood, long before anyone explained it to me directly. He was the one who got celebrated. I was the one who got relied on. When his grades slipped, my mother called it finding himself. When mine slipped for one semester because I was working 20 hours a week at a grocery store to save for a car, she asked whether I was still keeping up, in a tone that suggested falling behind would be a personal failure rather than a math problem. Nobody assigned us those roles out loud. We just grew into the shape of the space we'd each been given, the way water finds the container it's poured into. By the time I was 14, I was the one who noticed when the electric bill sat unopened on the counter for a week. I was the one who found a second credit card statement wedged behind the toaster, folded so small it looked deliberate. My mother would smile when I brought it up and say something like, "You worry too much for someone your age," as though noticing a $300 minimum payment was a personality flaw, instead of arithmetic. I went to college on a mix of loans, a partial grant, and a work-study job in the bursar's office, where I learned before I learned almost anything else, that money moves in patterns, and patterns tell the truth even when people don't. I graduated with a finance degree and a job offer from a regional bank before I ever walked the stage. At the graduation dinner, my mother told my aunts I'd always been good with numbers, the same distant, proud but not quite hers tone she used for my brother's baseball trophies, like the achievement belonged to someone she happened to be related to. My competence was useful to my family long before it was ever celebrated by them. When I was 16, my mother handed me the checkbook for the church fundraiser she'd volunteered to organize, because, "You're just better at this than I am," and I spent 2 weekends reconciling receipts for a bake sale, while she accepted compliments from the pastor about how well the event had come together. When my grandmother's estate needed sorting after she passed, I was the one who drove 2 hours each way to organize the paperwork, while my mother told relatives on the phone that she couldn't bear to go through it herself. I didn't mind the work. I minded. Later, realizing that my competence had never once been treated as something that belonged to me, only as a resource the family could borrow whenever it was convenient, and forget to credit whenever it wasn't. The pattern started my sophomore year. Federal student loan refunds, the balance left over after tuition and fees, meant to cover books, rent, the gap between what a loan actually pays for and what a semester costs, used to come to me directly, in my name. Then my mother offered to hold on to them, since I was, in her words, still learning how money works. I was 19. She sat across from me at that same kitchen table, took the check out of my hand before I'd even opened the envelope, and said, "Let me hold on to that for you, sweetheart. You don't want to blow through it on nonsense." I said yes, because agreeing felt like being taken care of, and I hadn't yet learned the difference between the two. The first check was $6,200. She deposited it into an account she called Naomi's fund, though I never once saw a statement for it, not that year or any year after. The second year it was $9,800. She told me she was keeping it safe so it wouldn't disappear on nonsense, using the same word twice, like a rehearsed line. I believed her the way you believe a voice you've trusted since before you could form full sentences. This is where the pen comes in. I bought a green fountain pen the summer before my junior year, from a stationery shop 2 blocks from campus, because I liked the way it made even a boring reconciliation feel deliberate, almost ceremonial. I used it to balance my checkbook, to circle discrepancies on bank statements, to write questions in the margins of documents I didn't fully understand yet. It became a habit before it became anything else. I still use that same pen today, on every account that doesn't add up. By senior year, the refund checks had grown, closer to $14,000 and then $17,500 across the last 2 years, as my course load thinned into upper-level classes with lab fees and required materials. Each time, my mother collected the check before I could deposit it myself. Each time, I asked, in my careful, green-inked way, where the money had gone. Each time she told me it was growing, that she'd moved it somewhere smarter, that I didn't need to worry about it right now. I have one memory from that period I return to more than any other. I was home for winter break, doing homework at the kitchen table, and I overheard my mother on the phone with my Aunt Patricia in the next room. "She doesn't even ask anymore," my mother said, and laughed, soft and easy. "She just trusts me." I sat very still, my green pen resting against a half-finished Sudoku, and felt something in my chest go quiet in a way I didn't have language for yet. I told myself it was pride. Mothers talk about their daughters that way sometimes, I reasoned. It means something good. It didn't occur to me until years later, sitting in my own apartment, reconciling someone else's ledger for a living, circling a discrepancy with that same green pen, that the sentence I overheard wasn't pride at all. It was relief. She wasn't proud that I trusted her. She was relieved that I hadn't checked. There's one more scene from that era I need you to have, because it's the one that taught me how the family actually kept score. The spring I turned 22, a month before graduation, I asked my mother, carefully, at the kitchen table, my green pen capped in front of me like a small piece of armor, whether we could sit down together and go over Naomi's fund before I moved out for my first job. I told her I wasn't accusing her of anything. I told her I just wanted to see the numbers, the way I'd want to see the numbers for any account, with my name attached to it. She went very still, the way she went still whenever a conversation moved from feelings into figures, and said, "You sound exactly like your father's sister, always with the spreadsheets and the highlighted columns. Can't you just trust that I have it handled?" Then she changed the subject to my cousin's engagement and never circled back, and I let her, because pushing further felt, in that moment, like it would cost more than it would recover. I filed the deflection away the same way I file every operational detail, quietly, with a date attached, and told myself I'd revisit it later. It took me 9 more years to revisit it. Now, if you've ever been the child whose money disappeared into someone else's safekeeping and came back only as an excuse, drop a comment. Just one word. I want to know I'm not the only one who understands what it feels like to hand someone your future and watch them file it under their own name. The call that started everything came on a Tuesday in April, 3 weeks before Mother's Day. My mother's voice had a brightness to it I'd learned, over 31 years, to treat as a warning light rather than good news. "I want you to save the date for brunch this year," she said. "I have an announcement, and I need you to sign something while everyone's there. It's a family investment. You'll love it." I asked what kind of investment. She laughed the way she always laughed when a question landed too close to something she didn't want examined. "Don't be so serious, Naomi. It's a surprise. Your father already knows, and your brother's excited." I noted that my brother being excited meant nothing. He got excited about fantasy football trades. I noted that my father, already knowing, usually meant he'd nodded along to something explained to him for 90 seconds while the television was on. Two things caught my attention the way discrepancies catch my attention at work. Small, easy to miss, impossible to unnotice once seen. The first was the word investment, which my mother had never once used correctly in her life. She used it the way other people use the word blessing, to make something sound inevitable instead of chosen. The second was a photo she'd posted 3 days earlier, a sunset over turquoise water, captioned, "Can't wait to make this permanent," geotagged to a resort outside Cancún I didn't recognize the name of and had never heard her mention before that week. I called my colleague Renata, who sits 2 desks from me and has spent 11 years in fraud prevention before moving to my department, and I told her what I was thinking about doing, quietly pulling records before brunch, instead of just asking my mother directly. If you ask her directly, she gets 3 weeks to build an explanation, Renata said. If you already have the answer, she only gets the time it takes you to open a folder. She also told me, more gently, that I didn't owe my mother the benefit of the doubt just because she'd earned it once, 20 years ago, and hadn't earned it since. I told her I knew that. I wasn't sure I believed myself yet. I decided to go to brunch anyway, and to go prepared, for a reason I didn't say out loud to Renata, though I suspect she guessed it. Some small, stubborn part of me still wanted to be wrong. I wanted to walk in, see a family photo album or a modest anniversary gift, and feel foolish for spending a weekend pulling public records on my own mother. I have built a career on being the person who checks. I wanted, one more time, to not have to. The honest reason I went, the one I hadn't said out loud even to myself until I was already in the car, was smaller and more embarrassing than professional diligence. I wanted one normal Mother's Day. I wanted to sit at a table with a string of relatives and eat Eggs Benedict and let someone else worry about the bill for 2 hours. I had spent so many years being the one who noticed things that I sometimes forgot how much I wanted, underneath all of it, to just be someone's daughter without an audit attached. That wanting is what made the folder in my bag feel less like preparation and more like a betrayal of my own hope, even though I knew, riding down there with the radio too loud, that hope was exactly the thing my mother had been counting on for 4 straight years. I called my therapist, Dana, 2 days before brunch, on my lunch break, sitting in my car in the parking garage because I didn't want to say any of this out loud inside the office, mostly to talk myself out of going at all. She didn't tell me what to do, she rarely does, but she asked a question that stuck with me longer than I expected it to. "What are you hoping happens if you're wrong?" she asked. "And what are you prepared to do if you're right?" I didn't have a clean answer for the first part. For the second part, I already knew, sitting in my car in the therapist's parking lot with a blue folder on the passenger seat, that I was prepared to say the number out loud in front of whoever happened to be standing there. Dana also reminded me, gently, that showing up with documentation wasn't the same as showing up looking for a fight. "You're not going there to punish her," she said. "You're going there to stop being the only one who knows the truth." If you've ever sat with a suspicion you were almost hoping would turn out to be nothing, stay with me. I know exactly what that felt like, and I know exactly how it ended. That Thursday night, I did what I do professionally, except the ledger belonged to my own life. I started with the county recorder's office, where a property search under my mother's name returned a deed filed 18 months earlier for a 2-bedroom vacation ownership unit through a company called Coral Bay Vacation Collection. Purchase price, $22,400, with my mother listed as sole owner. I called the loan servicer that had handled my student refunds and requested a full disbursement history, which, as a former account holder, I was entitled to see. What came back, over the next 2 days, was a set of 4 canceled check images, each one endorsed on the back in my mother's handwriting, each one deposited into an account that wasn't mine and never had been. I added the 4 figures together twice, the way I double-check any number before I let myself believe it. The total matched, almost to the dollar, the amount I'd been quietly afraid it would. I spent that Saturday cross-referencing dates the way I cross-reference dates at work when I'm building a case file for compliance instead of for family. Lining up each deposit against the semester it was meant to cover, watching the timeline confirm itself with an accuracy that almost felt cruel. Sophomore fall, deposited 3 days after the servicer issued it. Junior spring, deposited the same afternoon. My mother hadn't just taken the money. She'd been fast about it, efficient in a way that told me this wasn't a lapse in judgment repeated 4 times by accident. It was a system, refined a little more each year. I'm sure there are forensic accountants watching this who could walk through exactly how a pattern like that gets built, and hidden better than I can explain it here, but I didn't need an expert to tell me what 4 consecutive years of same-day deposits meant. I already spoke that language for a living. I printed everything. The deed. The 4 check images. A maintenance fee statement I found taped to the fridge on a prior visit, and had photographed without thinking much of it, showing the unit was $3,100 behind on annual fees. I slid the stack into a blue folder, and I put my green pen in my bag, the way I do before any meeting where numbers are going to matter. Mother's Day brunch was held at a banquet room my mother had rented at a restaurant she liked. The kind with cloth napkins, a brunch buffet nobody needed, and a string quartet playing softly from a corner speaker that made everything sound more ceremonial than it should have. There were place cards. My mother had never once used a place card for a holiday in her life, and the fact that she'd used them for this one told me, before I'd even taken my coat off, exactly how much weight she'd put on the day going a certain way. 14 of us were there. My parents, my brother, 3 aunts, an uncle, 2 cousins, a family friend my mother called, like a sister to me, and me, carrying a folder my mother assumed was empty. My Aunt Patricia found me at the mimosa table before I'd even sat down. "Your mother's been glowing about this for weeks," she said, touching my arm the way she does when she wants a reaction. "She says the 2 of you have always been so close, so generous with each other." I said something non-committal about the weather. My cousin Diane leaned in a moment later to tell me how brave it was that I'd never married, since some people just aren't built for sacrifice the way your mom is. My uncle asked, half joking, whether I'd finally loosened the purse strings for the family, a phrase he must have picked up from someone else, because it wasn't the kind of thing he'd normally say. I understood, by the 3rd comment, that I had walked into a room where my absence of a ring and presence of a paycheck had already been assigned a moral weight I hadn't agreed to, and where every relative at that table had apparently rehearsed a version of the same sentence without knowing they were doing it. My mother stood when the mimosas were poured, tapped her glass, and made her announcement to the table before I'd finished my coffee. She and my father, she said, were expanding their little vacation investment, a 2nd unit right next to the first, so the whole family could visit together for years to come. She turned to me, still smiling, and said the sentence I'd been half expecting and still wasn't ready for. "Naomi's going to help us with the paperwork. She's so good with this kind of thing." I read the room the way I read a client's office before a difficult meeting, who was seated closest to the door, who was watching my mother instead of me, who had already reached for their glass before the toast had even finished. My father's shoulders had the particular set they get when he already suspects bad news and is bracing for the shape of it. My brother was grinning at nothing in particular, still writing whatever version of the story he'd been told. Nobody at that table except me knew there was already a folder with their family's real numbers in it, sitting closed on my lap under a cloth napkin. Something in me went cold and still, in a way that had nothing to do with anger. It was the same sensation I get at work, when a number that shouldn't reconcile suddenly does, all at once, and the whole shape of a problem resolves into something I can finally see clearly. I set my coffee down. I opened the blue folder. Would you have opened that folder at the table in front of 14 people? Or would you have waited for a private moment after everyone had gone home? Inside the folder, on top, was the deed. Coral Bay Vacation Collection, my mother's name, filed 18 months earlier, a purchase price with 3 commas in it. Under that were 4 check images, each one bearing my mother's endorsement, each one drawn from a student loan refund that had been issued in my name. I laid them on the white tablecloth, one at a time, the way I lay documents in front of a client when I need them to stop talking and start looking. The table went quiet in the specific way a room goes quiet, when it senses something has shifted but hasn't caught up to what yet. My mother's smile held for one more second. I watched it hold, and then it didn't. "What is this?" she said, not really a question, her voice dropping the bright performance tone she'd used for the announcement. "This is the 4 refund checks you told me you were keeping safe for me," I said. I kept my voice level, the same voice I use in a boardroom, when a number is wrong, and someone senior is hoping I won't say so out loud. $48,000, over 4 years. This is the deed that money bought. And this, I said, sliding the maintenance statement across last, is the invoice showing the first unit is $3,100 behind on fees, which I'm guessing is part of why you need a second buyer on a second unit today. My father picked up the deed first. I watched him read it twice, his jaw working the way it does when he's trying to make a sentence mean something other than what it says. "Carol," he said, and it was the first time all day I'd heard him use her full name instead of a nickname. "Is this? Whose money is this?" My mother's hands went to the tablecloth, smoothing a wrinkle that wasn't there. "I was going to tell her eventually," she said, to the table more than to me. "It was never, I didn't take anything. I was building something for the family. For all of us. You'll thank me one day, Naomi, when we're all sitting on that balcony together." "I never got a statement," I said. "Not once, in 4 years, for an account you told me was mine. I called the servicer this week and asked for the disbursement history because I wanted to know if I was wrong about what I remembered. I wasn't wrong." I set the 4 check images side by side, in order, the way I'd laid them out on my own kitchen table 3 nights earlier, so that anyone looking could see the pattern for themselves, instead of having to take my word for it. My aunt tried to recover the room first, reaching for the tone she'd used at the mimosa table an hour earlier. "Naomi, honey, this is a family celebration," she said. "Can't this wait until after dessert?" I told her, level and unhurried, that I'd waited 4 years already, and dessert wasn't going to change the total. My mother tried a different angle next, the one I'd been braced for without knowing it. "After everything I've done for this family," she said, her voice catching on cue, "you're going to humiliate me in front of everyone over paperwork?" My father, still holding the deed, said her name a second time, quieter, and for once, didn't try to smooth anything over on her behalf. My aunt opened her mouth to say something about family and gratitude, the sentence half formed on her face before it left her mouth, and our server, a young man who had been refilling water glasses at the far end of the table, quietly set the pitcher down and stepped back rather than approach, the way people step back from something they can tell isn't finished. I noticed him do it. I noticed my father notice him do it too. Later, on my way out, that same server caught my eye near the coat check and gave me a small, deliberate nod, the kind you give someone you'll never see again but recognize anyway. It was such a small thing. I've thought about it more than almost anything else from that day. My mother tried again, softer this time, the guilt version instead of the pride version. "I have been under so much pressure," she said. "Your father's pension isn't what we thought it would be. I didn't know how else to build something for our retirement, for the family's future. I thought I'd pay it back before you ever needed to know. I needed a laptop my junior year and used a payment plan for 11 months instead," I said. "I needed groceries some weeks and didn't buy them. I didn't know I was financing a swimming pool while I was doing it. I wasn't raising my voice. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't performing calm. I simply didn't have anything left in me that wanted to shout." My mother's face had gone from bright to pale to something in between, the color draining the way it does from a check you already know is going to bounce. She reached for my father's hand and he didn't take it, not out of cruelty, but because he was still holding the deed in both of his. My cousin Diane, who 20 minutes earlier had called me brave for not being built for sacrifice, was very quietly looking at her plate. My uncle, who'd made the joke about loosening purse strings, had gone entirely still, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, as though finishing the bite would somehow make him complicit. My mother tried one more approach, the one she'd always saved for when guilt and pride had both failed, recruiting the room to her side. "Someone say something," she said, looking around the table, her voice thinner now than it had been all afternoon. "Patricia." "Walter. Doesn't anyone think I've earned a little grace here?" Nobody answered right away, and the not answering was its own kind of answer. My father finally set the deed down flat on the table, squared its edges with 2 fingers the way he squares everything when he doesn't know what else to do with his hands, and said, "I think we need to hear the rest of what Naomi found before anybody talks about grace." "I'm not signing anything today," I said, and this was the sentence I had rehearsed the least and meant the most. "I'm not signing for a second unit on a first one you can't afford to keep, and I would like the $48,000 back, on a repayment schedule we put in writing, starting this month." The silence that followed lasted long enough that I counted it without meaning to, a habit from work, where I count seconds during pauses in negotiations because silence has a duration, and a duration tells you something. 14 people at that table went quiet, and the quiet did something words hadn't managed all afternoon. It became the answer nobody at that table was willing to say out loud. If you've ever sat in a room where 14 people went quiet, and the silence itself became the confession nobody would say out loud, share this with someone who needs to hear it. You'll want to hear what happened next. I drove home with the windows down even though it wasn't warm enough for that, because I needed the noise of the road to fill the space where a conversation should have been. My phone stayed face down on the passenger seat, buzzing every few minutes with names I wasn't ready to read. When I got to my apartment, I made tea I didn't drink, and I sat at my kitchen table with the blue folder still closed in front of me, running my thumb along the edge of it, the way I used to run my thumb along the spine of that spiral notebook my mother kept when I was 14. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt like someone who had just finished a very long audit and found exactly what she expected to find, which is its own particular kind of exhausted. The consequences arrived the way consequences usually do, in paperwork rather than in drama. My parents listed the first unit for resale within 6 weeks, at a loss, once it became clear neither of them could carry the maintenance fees alone, without the second buyer they'd hoped I would become. The developer, unsurprisingly, offered no refund on the difference, and my mother spent most of a phone call with me, itemizing every fee she felt the company had buried in fine print, as though the unfairness of a vacation contract was the part of this story that most deserved outrage. I let her talk. I didn't correct her. Some conversations aren't worth spending the accuracy on. My mother called me twice in the 2 weeks after brunch, once to apologize in a way that circled the apology without ever quite landing on it, and once, 3 days later, to ask whether I still had the maintenance fee statement, because she'd misplaced her copy. I sent it to her without comment. She opened a repayment plan with me, through a written agreement, $600 a month, the first payment arriving 9 days late, and every one since arriving on time, which I've come to understand is the most honesty she's capable of showing me right now, and I've decided that's allowed to be enough for the moment, even if it isn't enough forever. My brother Caleb called me that same week, which surprised me more than anything that happened at brunch. "I didn't know," he said. "I want you to know I didn't know, and I should have asked more questions when Mom kept saying it was a surprise. I'm sorry I was excited about something that turned out to be your money." It wasn't a grand gesture. It was one honest sentence from someone who'd had every reason to stay comfortably quiet, and I've held on to it more than I expected to. He also told me, almost as an afterthought, that he'd offer to help cover part of the maintenance fees on the first unit himself, not because he owed it, but because he wanted the repayment to feel less like something I was carrying alone. I told him he didn't have to. He said he wanted to anyway, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let someone else hold a small piece of something without checking it twice. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Was there a moment when you realized the help you were giving your family wasn't help at all? It was a payment plan for someone else's comfort? Tell me. I read every one. My father and I have talked twice since brunch. Briefly. Both times about logistics rather than feelings, which is its own kind of progress for a man who spent 26 years handing over an unopened paycheck and trusting the arithmetic to someone else. I offered my parents something real in place of the second signature they'd wanted. The name of a fee-only financial counselor 2 colleagues of mine have used. Someone with no stake in selling them anything, who could help them actually see what their retirement looks like without a vacation property attached to it. I told them I would sit in on one meeting if they wanted a second set of eyes. I told them I would not be signing paperwork, co-signing a loan, or quietly covering a maintenance bill again, this year or any year after it. Here's what 4 years of student loan checks and one Mother's Day brunch taught me. You don't have to raise your voice to be believed. You don't have to make a scene to make something stop. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the room is a folder, a green pen, and a willingness to lay the truth out flat and let everyone else decide what to do with what they're looking at. I also learned that loving someone and auditing them aren't opposites. Sometimes the second one is the only honest way left to do the first. That's my story. I still carry that same green pen in my bag, the one I bought in a stationery shop the summer I turned 20, the one I used to circle a discrepancy that turned out to be my own life. I use it now for something better than reconciling other people's mistakes. I use it to sign my own name to agreements I actually understand. And now, if you're watching this, I want to ask you something. Would you have given your mother a second chance to explain herself privately, away from 14 witnesses and a table of mimosas? Or would you have done exactly what I did, and let the whole family see the numbers at the same time you did? There's no clean answer here, and I've stopped expecting one. I only know which choice let me finally sleep through the night. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me one word: reconciled. Because that's what I want every person watching this to understand. You don't fight a betrayal like this with anger. You fight it with documentation, patience, and a pen that never runs out of ink at the wrong moment. This story is fictional, created for dramatic entertainment, education, and reflection. But the lesson underneath it is real. The people who ask you to trust them with your money the loudest are sometimes the ones who've been counting on you never checking. And the surest way to protect the people you love is to stay someone who does.